I saw the Kardashians on the street once. Hello.
Hey, y'all. Can you see us and hear us okay? Ronald Meyer says, does anyone know who Louv is? Jason Louv.
No one knows who I am.
He is here and welcome. I'm glad y'all saw this. I was a little afraid that I wasn't giving you any advance notice, so people might not see it. But I'm glad y'all are here. Yeah, Jason is in town, and we were talking about me doing his podcast, and I figured, well, while we're doing it, we're here filming. I figured I would just turn this on and let y'all sit with us and watch this.
Hello, everyone. Yeah. So
does this sound okay?
That sounds wonderful. So this obviously is not going to go into the. This will be on the Ultra Culture with Jason Louv podcast. But yeah, so the only thing with these microphones is definitely grab them by this, and you can keep it like that.
Very good.
Because if you hit this with your hand, it's going to make like clacking noises.
Got it.
Come on down.
Right.
And I'm going to take these off, so I won't know if it goes out.
Yeah, I was trying to get y'all on as quick as possible just because it was like as soon as I walked in the door, we automatically started talking about a lot of really amazing conversational topics. So we were like, we better hurry up and get this on.
Maybe we should turn the lights on. How are you with light levels?
Yeah, I'm good. Whatever you want to do.
It smells kind of dark. Okay. This is one of those Airbnbs where there's little passive aggressive notes everywhere.
Like, don't touch this, don't do that.
Yeah, I know it's got like exclamation marks at the end. I
actually hate B&Bs. I like chain hotels, like bottom of the barrel chain hotels, like La Quinta or Holiday Inn Express.
Oh yeah.
Something that's going to be like $100, $120 a night, and you know it's like the Starbucks of hotels.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know what you're going to get when you go in.
So I was just saying, I was working at. Hold on, let me turn this off. That's gonna drive me nuts. Slowing down. Yeah.
So has it crossed your mind to leave Austin behind you and move here?
Yes, except then my girlfriend reminds me about the hurricanes. And so what crossed my mind is like, maybe I should leave all my stuff in Austin, which is kind of like disaster proof, knock on wood. It's like built on like granite, and do some summer supplements here.
Yeah.
That I would definitely do, particularly for writing stuff like that. I love it here.
That was actually why I learned how to drive, is because you've got to be able to evacuate hurricanes at a moment's notice.
Yeah, that would bum me out because I left California because the light's on fire every year. And you just see everything burning from your window, and then like the air quality is awful. And Austin definitely does not have that issue.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how I would do with regular hurricanes.
Yeah, as long as you have advance notice and have your own car, you're usually okay. But it's also there's things you don't take into consideration or think about until like after you've experienced. Like you have to keep your car filled with gas at all times, because if a hurricane does start to come, there's going to be a rush for gas for people to get away, and every gas station in the city is going to be completely empty.
Yeah, well, that was like that. I mean, LA was like that.
Yeah,
you got to think ahead. But yeah, I mean, like, I definitely want to spend a lot of time here. But it's also like I'm kind of like, I feel like this might be like the first time's always free situation where I'm kind of walking around being like, oh, this is awesome. And then like the friends we were out with last night were like, yeah, you look like a tourist and you're going to get robbed. So it's, I'm feeling like it's probably awesome until like some shit happens. Yeah. So what do you want to talk about? I mean, I'm open for anything. I don't have like a conversational agenda.
No agenda?
Just kind of like hanging out.
Well, I think, just maybe even keeping up with the stuff we were talking about already.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff, like you were talking about, what was the name of the book, the Crowley book?
The Vision and the Voice.
The Vision and the Voice. We were talking about that, and he had asked, like, did I read it? And I was saying, yeah, or I tried to, but the thing with so much of Crowley's stuff is I could not decipher it. I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. And for me, so much of his stuff was like that. Like you don't understand what he's saying until after you experience it. Then it's like something happens and snaps into place. But you were talking about how you got so much out of that book.
Yeah, I think. Well, I was saying for me, Vision in the Voice is the payload with Crowley. It's much. I think it's his best book, and I also think that he fell off drastically after that, to the point where, like, for me, Crowley. Like I do this exercise where I try to read everything he wrote in order, and I've never been able to. The last time I did it, I started with all of his like god awful poetry when he was like 12, like all the way up to the Vision of the Voice, and that goes through basically the period where he was working with and in the Golden Dawn and the Golden Dawn system. And then he does Golden Dawn, he's doing Abramelin, that whole thing, the fall of the Golden Dawn happens, and then he goes with Neuberg out to the desert to do Enochian, and he considers that his initiation into the inner order and becoming a secret chief and Magister Templi and all of this. And basically he sees that as, I think this happens to a lot of people who go through magical orders too. It's like he leaves the order and then he feels that he finds the true inner order through that.
Yeah.
But I first read that book in England in the early 2000s, and I just thought it was the most profound. I didn't fully understand it, but I thought that it was the most profound, one of the most profound books of world spiritual literature, just on the beauty of the writing itself ever. But yeah, he falls off after that. I mean, there's like a lot of people said it's like, well, he got into the triangle with Karanzan and let Karanzan possess him, and then he was never the same again. I think, don't necessarily believe that, but I think that he definitely ran out of money after that, and the drug started to take hold more. And then he got his whole thing after that was OTO and sex magic, and that for me is cool, but it's not as interesting as the Golden Dawn system, which is not him. It's it's this older thing. But for me, the importance of that book is that it updates basically. I just wrote, and then I'll stop talking, but I just wrote the introduction for Lon Milo Duquette's Magic of Aleister Crowley book. And I was trying to say, well, at this point in my life, what do I say about Crowley? And I said the most important thing about Crowley, beyond his personality, is that he melded the best techniques of Western and Eastern magic. And I think that's still true, by the way. Mm-hmm. Like his yoga instructions are phenomenal. He didn't come up with them. He got them from Ellen Bennett. But he melded the best of West and East. And then he updated the cosmology from a geocentric to a heliocentric universe, because that had not, heliocentric solar system, but a solar system, a conception of reality where all stars are essentially gravitationally equal in their own orbits. So he's the only person, as far as I know, he's the only person still to update magic, which, as you know, as we were talking about, is a cosmological stellar about the night sky, about the planets and the stars. But he updated it for how we understand the universe now, and I don't think anyone else has done that. So that's why that book is so important.
Yeah, I think the thing, I guess, that I got the most out of all of Crowley's work, and this will seem almost like an insignificant, tiny little thing, but it was actually like looking up the grade structure for the AA. Like if you look at like not only what you're supposed to be doing or learning for each grade that you pass through, but like he explains some of like what you're going to experience. And it like we were talking about how these things are like flowery poetic metaphors. It's not always what you think it's going to be like, but after you go through it, then you look at it and you're like, oh, that's what he was describing. What you're describing, like I always think like in magic now, one of the like, it's kind of gotten diluted to the point that all people seem to be doing are arguing about minutia and other people's systems and other people's books and all of this kind of crap. Whereas what like so much in magic to me, I'm seeing mirrored in martial arts. When people reach a stage in martial arts where they're supposed to take everything they've learned, integrate it in a way, they understand it to the core of their being, and then you turn it into something else. Like Bruce Lee did. Bruce Lee creating Jeet Kune Do. That's the same thing.
I trained in some Jeet Kune Do. It's really interesting kind of chaos magic.
That's the
Really
same
cool.
thing. Yeah, I think in magic, when you become a master, you do the same thing with magic that people like Bruce Lee did with martial arts. Like you may use elements of different systems.
You have to
and com-
re-articulate it.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. There will be like a unique spin on it. And I think that's kind of the thing about, in Hakma, it says like one of the signs of this grade is like you receive a word.
Yeah.
And this word is sort of like the embodiment of everything that you have to teach and everything you've learned and the entirety of your philosophy and understanding of the universe and all that stuff, like condensed into one single word. That's the way you can tell Crowley reached.
I agree with that. And I think that on that point, all the words mean the same thing.
Yeah, yes.
I basically think Dilemma is Crowley's articulation of the Tao.
Yes.
It's all the Tao.
Yes.
But he articulated it, I think, beautifully. I mean, I know people knock Crowley, and obviously there were things that he did in his life that are questionable, to say the least. But he's been dead for over 75 years, and I think Crowley was a lot of people, and Crowley had a lot of fuckboy aspects. But like the Crowley that was the master truly was a master.
Yes.
He truly was. I mean, you put him next to somebody like Austin Sparrow, who I love too, but it's like we're not exactly talking about the same thing.
Why do you think it is, like we were talking at lunch the other day about how the differences in magic and other spiritual traditions, like I thought you articulated this perfectly, like you hit it dead on the head whenever you said that magic tends to inflate the ego in a way that other spiritual traditions don't necessarily do. Why?
I think it's the magic's teaching. As a Freudian, it's a teaching method. It's like all these spiritual paths are about submission to the church or submission to the pattern. Somebody else is laying down a pattern for life that you're supposed to follow, and if you follow it, you're good, and if you don't, you're bad. And magic is about personal empowerment. It's about the empowerment of the individual, and I don't think there's any way that you can do that doesn't inflate the ego. And I don't necessarily think that's bad. I mean, it's like when kids are growing up, they become teenagers and then they become like nightmares, because they're learning to assert themselves. I mean, even like 2-year-olds, when toddlers learn to assert themselves, they're like hellions from the depths, you know what I mean? So like, but I think the issue for me is not the ego inflation. And you know what, like sometimes I don't even think like, in the pagan community, we were talking about this, people love to fight each other and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of like, if it's done correctly, it's just a bunch of horse shit. But, it can be like sparring, I guess, in martial arts. So
iron sharpens iron.
Yeah. And, I mean, it can be awful too, but, and people who are overestimating their strength can get their asses handed to them real quick. Thunder happens. So, but I think that, and I was talking to a woman on my podcast recently who's been like in the Wiccan tradition since the 80s in New York, and we kind of agreed on this. She said that she left it because she couldn't handle all the ego and the fighting and all that, but then she kind of came back to it, and I just think it's a stage it's a stage, and if people are working in healthy orders, which is almost impossible to find now.
Mm-hmm. Why is that? Because I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. I mean, what I was going to say is there would be elders to check them. And the reason is the reason is because magic was broken in the West. It was broken by the church. It was broken by industrialization. Now it's probably more popular than it ever has been before. So now is a really awesome chance to reformulate some of that stuff. But most of the quote unquote magical traditions that people talk about only go back to the neo-pagan revival in the 60s. Mm-hmm. So you got, there's no unbroken Golden Dawn lineage. There's no unbroken OTO lineage.
Right.
There kind of is. But we have writing, we have the internet. I mean, my theory on the Western magical tradition is it was important. The major importance of the Western magical tradition is that it birthed science, which is a product of the Western magical tradition, but then it kind of was broken and fell off. it was kept, part of that was people, the elite, only keeping it for themselves. Part of it was industrialization. Part of it was the scientific revolution and materialism. Part of it was the Jesuits. Like you read about John Dee, the church is trying to straight out murder him in Prague. And also, I think that it got taken out during World War II. I think that basically the Western magical tradition regenerated in the Golden Dawn period, and then you had like Crowley and Fortune and things like that. I think they just all got nuked during World War II. They expended all the force trying to fight Germany, and then there was no tradition after World War II. It was dead until basically it was resurrected by Grady. I mean, there was Parsons. That was an incredible period, but it was just a few people, and then it was kind of resurrected in the 60s by the hippies. So
I think for me, like the things I really learned in my life and put into practice in magic beyond like the basic stuff, you get all that stuff like how to do the LBRP and the hexagram rituals and all that stuff. You get that from magic. But I think the things after that, after you've like mastered those things, after you've devoted years to doing them over and over and over relentlessly, the places that I got the things that led to like the most explosive amounts of growth for me were never in the realm of magic. They're usually in places that people don't even think to look for them. Like, are you familiar with Athanasius Kircher, like his work?
Yeah, I know the name. I know the name, and I've passed through that.
I mean, this is a guy.
Remind me, he's a Kabbalistic writer.
He was a priest. He was a Roman Catholic priest. He was born in Germany. Ended up moving to Italy. They called him, like so many of these guys that get into this stuff, like Da Vinci and all those guys. He ends up being like super polymathic to the point where that his nickname was the man who knew everything. And he ended up creating what would arguably be the world's very first museum, like in cabinets of curiosity, like they used to call them. Like he created that. He created like the very first moving image camera. Like it was this giant contraption that you could put your eye up to it and turn a crank and see images moving. Like he did tons of stuff. This is a priest in the 1500s. Nobody thinks when you start thinking about magic, learning magic, nobody thinks about looking at the work of a priest, a German priest in Italy during the 1500s. But that's where I got the information about the Shem operation.
Wow,
the 72 angels. Like if you look up Athanasius Kircher diagrams, one of the diagrams that comes up, and I don't think most people will look at it and understand what it even is. But what it is a diagram of how to invoke the 72 angels of the Shem operation using the formula of the LBRP. But most people are never, most people that come to magic have this almost like an axe to grind against Christianity. Or
that really holds people back.
It does.
It's like you don't have to be like, you don't have to be your dad. It's like, but you can't discard a world spiritual tradition.
I always think of it as eat the meat and spit out the bones.
Yeah.
Like there's going to be stuff about it that's not palatable, that you don't like, whatever. But if you are willing to, spit that stuff out, there's a real meat there to be had that is going to advance you on this path tremendously.
Well, that's one of the things I've appreciated so much about you and your work, where you're, it's like you have always been sincere, and you've been giving people the actual techniques, and you've actually done it. And that is so rare. Like you were saying to me the other day, like, you felt like you were the only one doing it. It's like, I don't necessarily disagree with you, because it's like, there's like, I think that magic in the US is a very different beast, pun intended, from magic in for instance, England, where so much of the tradition is from. Like you go over there and like people in the UK are like basically atheist, not particularly spiritual. And their magic for them is kind of this thing about like this kind of creepy English witchcraft thing, and Austin Spare and Crowley. But in the US, because of the US being what it is, it's been part of the cultural war. It's about being not Christian. It's about being like Temple of Satan. It's about being basically the opposite of the evangelicals. And it's like, okay, like I get that from, if you grow up in Texas and everyone around you are these psychos who believe in all this evangelical horseshit. But you're not doing magic. Magic is a technology. It's like magic. It is an actual practice. There is a right answer. There are things you do. It's like it's not just a badge you wear.
Yes.
You know, so
Yes. It's not just something to build an identity out of.
it's like a martial art.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Yeah. Honestly, that was rough for me in the beginning, just like being on death row. It's like I didn't want anything to do with anything that even came remotely close to Christianity. So even, all of the early Golden Dawn rituals, it's all about Hebrew names of God and, archangels and all this kind of stuff. If you're going to do this system the way it's designed, the way they left the records of how to do it, you've kind of got to get past that stuff,
yeah.
or you can't do it. So I thought, okay, just eat the meat, spit out the bones, whatever. But whenever I started doing it and I realized, oh my God, this stuff is working, this stuff is actually doing something to me, then you don't care about that stuff. It's no longer an act of rebellion.
Once you feel it.
Yes.
Once you understand what, like, you get a taste of Tifereth, you understand what forgiveness is at that level. It's like,
yes.
I think the thing for me that was helpful to realize also, and I only realized this recently, is Christianity in the U.S. is not Christianity. It's a heretical cult that was kicked out of Europe. I mean, the evangelicals are heretics. And there was a writer named Chris Hedges, who's a kind of liberal journalist, and he's a Lutheran priest. And he hates the evangelicals. He calls it Christo-fascism. But his opinion is, this is the opinion of a Lutheran priest. Basically, he says, like, we have these heretical people who are cruel. They hate people. They have nuclear weapons. They're just torturing everyone. And it's like, this isn't Christianity. This is a heretical offshoot. It's a cult of Christianity. And in America, we don't realize that. I think that was helpful for me.
Yeah.
But if you go to I don't know if you've ever gone to like Orthodox churches.
Yes.
Like there's magic there. I mean,
yes.
You do everything there.
Absolutely. That's actually like doing the magnum opus classes, stuff like that. Some of y'all on here already know about, like Derek, y'all saw him, stuff like that. But that's the church that he's actually a part of, the Orthodox Church. But one of the things, like he told me one time, that had profoundly changed the trajectory of my life. We were talking about how when I got out, I went through those nervous breakdowns and alcohol abuse just to try to survive, all that sort of stuff. Like one of the things he told me, we were talking about, like, if you want to have these beautiful, amazing, meaningful things in your life, then you have to go to where those places are, because you're going to absorb the energy of those things.
Yeah.
Like for me, that set me off on a path for the next year. Every single day, I spent at least part of the day in cathedrals all through New York City, whether they were Orthodox or Catholic. I tried to keep it to that, just because, like you say, with the more Protestant evangelical stuff, there's not a lot of magic.
You don't feel the juice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't have the, what do you call them? The little artifacts of things, like whether it's the tooth of a saint or, a piece of wood from whatever it is. I forget the word for it. Icons. Relics or icons. Yeah. They don't have stuff like that when you stand in the presence of them, it makes you feel some kind of awe of some sort.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about, I know people give Americans a lot of flack, but I feel that Americans are, particularly in comparison with the English, I mean, it's like Americans have such a sweet spiritual core to them. And sometimes it can be twisted, but it's like Americans they have faith in ways that other cultures don't. Not all cultures, but some cultures don't. Europe is so atheistic. It's so secular, socialist, atheistic, and it's just like there's no juice there.
Yeah.
But one of the beautiful things for me about, now I don't, but one of the beautiful things about living in big cities like New York and LA is you have access to all that. Like LA, like every spiritual tradition in the world came there and built some huge temple where you can go. And it's like, you go, like I used to go to Orthodox Cathedral where it's like they have a gigantic, huge, everything's gold, and it had like a gigantic picture of Sophia right there. And I went to and a lot of them are hidden. Like I went to a Syrian Orthodox church and they've got these huge murals of like 6-winged angels with eyes in them. And it's just like, but yeah, I mean, I think like we were talking about New Orleans, I mean, the vibe here is different, certainly than in Austin or LA. And it's just like the power of place is a real thing.
Yes.
And who was I talking to? I was talking to someone else. Oh, John Michael Greer, where he's made the point in his book that one of the biggest oversight that he thinks was made in Western magic is, and Western philosophy, is they left out the power of place, which, for instance, the Native Americans completely understood. That's not a concept, because we want to have this idea that everything is portable in our head, and I don't think it is.
And what you just said, for me, I don't know why or what triggered it or how it started or anything else, but that has always been a huge chunk of my own practice. And part of it, I think, started like whenever I first got out of prison. The very first place I ever went was in New York City, Manhattan. And even though it was overwhelming, and, you know, you go from solitary confinement to the streets of Manhattan overnight, it shatters you. It really fucks you up in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I knew I loved this place to the core of my soul, you know, in a way that I will never be able to articulate to anyone. You know, I did not want to ever leave that place. I interacted with the spirit of New York City the way most people only ever will with another person.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it was a teacher. It was a friend.
For sure.
Like, it was everything to me. So I interacted with it in ways like I used, you know, this was one of the things I was talking about in a class recently, like telling people like different things you can use for sigils other than just like trying to get money, you know, whatever it is people normally think of. Like, one of the things I did was to like bind myself to the egregore or the spirit or the intelligence of the place of New York City.
Okay.
Was I took all of the different names of all the neighborhoods that I loved, like Chinatown, Soho, Harlem, Tribeca, and using Austin Osman Spare's method, turned them into sigils, and then had those sigils, I charged those and then had them tattooed all over my body so that wherever I went in the world, I would still have that energetic connection to the intelligence behind New York City.
You still feel that?
That's a really good question. And the answer is no. But I think the reason it is because the New York City that I had that connection to, this is going to sound crazy, but it doesn't exist.
Not to me.
I think it died. It died during the pandemic. It's to me, what it felt like pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, is like, imagine if you're walking down the street one day and you see somebody that was a really great friend of yours, but you haven't seen them in a year. And you see them and you get excited and you run up to them and you're like, hey man, what's going on? And they turn around and you look at your eyes and you know it's not somebody that looks like them. This is their body. This is absolutely 100% their physical essence, but you are not looking at the same spirit that was in that person.
Yeah, that's a scary experience.
That's what New York felt like to me.
Yeah.
So it was like the part of the thing that I had built that connection to died. It wasn't the physical location. It was the energy behind it. And when that changed, when the egregore of New York changed, it changed the connection.
Yeah, a lot of people told me the same thing. And, you know, as you know, I lived in New York for 7 years, most of which was around Jen. And I left during the economic collapse because it was just too expensive to live there. It's like, I don't think you can even live there if you're not like a rich kid or like a Saudi prince or something like that. You know, it's just too, like, I always used to, even back then, I compared New York to, you know, it's like sharks always have to keep moving because that's how they breathe. And if they stop, all the other sharks will eat them. That's New York.
Yes, it is.
You know, it's like everyone there. It's like, I remember the whole time I was there, and this was even before the economic collapse where people were still making money. It's like the whole time I was there, it's like, you know, it's like you see someone on the street in New York. It's like, hey, what do you have for me? Tell me, like, okay, what business do we have? The one thing that I wanted to do more than anything the whole time I was there was like this, or just sit on a couch and watch TV with someone. Not once. It's like, and people have told me that too. I mean, they said like, you know, like even like the culture in New York, like everyone's just kind of like cancel kids now, and there's like, you know, looking for each other to slip up, and just I hate that energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I love about New Orleans is it's the opposite of all of that. In New York, it's almost like you said, like everybody is trying to do something. People go to New York because they want, you know, I want to be a world famous ballet dancer. I want to be, you know, a Wall Street guy. I want to be whatever it is. They go to New York for a reason.
American Psycho.
Yeah.
Right.
Here, the reason people come to New Orleans is because they want to enjoy their lives.
Yeah.
Whether they want to eat and drink, get obliterated, listen to music, whatever it is, people come here because they want to enjoy their lives. And it creates an entire like opposite end of the spectrum kind of energy as I experienced in New York. And that's one of the reasons I love it. It's like nothing else in the world exists outside the bubble of New Orleans. It's not competing with people. You know, New York and LA are always
must be refreshing.
Yes. I mean, New York and LA are always competing with each other. Like all these cities are like always trying to one up each other. And nobody in New Orleans cares what any other city in the United States is doing. It is a world unto itself.
That sounds great. I mean, I can definitely, like you were saying yesterday when we were talking, that this is kind of one of the last bastions of freedom. And I feel that way about, I really think that, well, first of all, that's just refreshing because it's so hard to find now. Mm-hmm. Everything's watched, everything's controlled, everything's, you know, and not just in the scary thing too is everything's controlled now, not just by like the government or like the corporations, but other people. They're constantly watching everything you say online and be like, oh, well, I got you now. You know, it's just so stressful. And people are not allowed to be themselves. And but I think that the South is where it's at now. I read a thing a couple days before I came here that said like something like $60 billion worth of economic worth left. I think just New York, and $100 billion of wealth has gone into the South since the pandemic.
Wow!
Everyone's moving to Austin. People are moving to Atlanta, which I haven't been to, but I'd love to go to. People are moving to Florida, and you know, obviously the South has some pretty fucked up history, but you know, like I think it's it feels so much more real to me and alive. Like LA is not. LA is a city built on illusion.
Yeah.
In the same way that Las Vegas is.
Yeah.
Like that. And New York doesn't really feel like America. It feels like the capital of the world, which is why it's so exciting. But the South is kind of its own thing.
What's the illusion of LA? Like when you say that, like, because I've had somebody else say that exact. The way they described it to me was they said LA is almost like a light that was created to draw people to it. You know, like people that think I'm going to go to LA and be discovered, and I'm going to be a movie star, or I'm going to be a rock star, or whatever it is. They created this light that drew people to it, and all that really happens is those people that get drew in get used up and tossed out to make way for the next.
Yeah, and that is pretty dark. I think it's actually a lie that you can go to LA and make it. You have to have already made it and then go to LA. And like I talk to so many people in LA, it's like, look, the most talented people in the world in any field go to LA and at some point. And it's like, you know, I was like talking to a guy who's like the biggest, or he knew somebody who's like the biggest, we're gonna get this wrong. He was like, giving me an example, it's like the biggest dancer in all of Australia. And, you know, it's like, you're the big deal where you came from. And then you go there and it's like, nobody cares.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you're nothing here.
Yes.
And that's very hard for people. I think it's brutal for women, particularly the appearance standards and competitiveness and things like that. But what I mean by that, it's like, it's always fascinated me magically too, because I grew up just south of it in San Diego. And LA is only what, like, you know, 100, 150 years old. It was built in the desert in the middle of nowhere. Not the middle of nowhere, it's on the ocean, but it was built in the desert. And it has no history. And the city exists purely to produce illusion. It's the dream-making center of the world. So it's a city. Everyone's identity is an illusion. Everyone's in the business of making illusion. There's no, there is indigenous history there, obviously, and there's a history when it was Mexico. So that is real. But the other, surprisingly, and I think he was right, because the other aspect of it is every spiritual tradition in the world went there. It's, you know, every ethnic group is represented there, and they all brought their own spiritual traditions. You can find temples for every religion. So I feel that it's like the city of demons and the city of angels. You know, the city of angels is not the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to me because it's a city where it's full of people who are trying to be something other than human. Mm-hmm. They're trying to be an idea or a symbol or
a concept. Yeah.
But LA is very. LA has no emotional food for you. There's nothing unlike here. You know.
So what would you like if somebody asked you what's the difference in the feel? Well, first off, do you think, you know, this is kind of an abstract word to even use, but like we were talking about how in New Orleans you feel magic, like you feel something here. Do you feel that did you ever feel that in LA?
Yeah, you actually do. Yeah, but I'll say, you know what the vibe you feel in LA is Thelema and Kenneth Anger
Yeah,
and Charles Manson. It's got that vibe. It's got this kind of like, and that's not bad, you know. Like I find that fascinating. You know, it's like you can go to where Jack Parsons lived, and you find out he was born, did his OTO stuff, and died all on the same street in Pasadena. So there's that. It's not a bad vibe. And in fact, LA is one of the heartbreaking things about leaving LA is like there's wonderful, beautiful things about LA. It was a place where you could go as a creative person and kind of coast for a long time, and everyone's smart and creative, and you know, and everyone there is into alternative spirituality.
But are they really doing it, or is it more just like?
Yeah, they can be. A lot of it's performative. It's like they want to be on a reality show, but it's like, you know, I used to live on the grounds of Self-Realization Fellowship, right next to the headquarters of Scientology. You know, so it's like I think that Scientology is a big part of the vibe there.
Yeah,
it's kind of like I think that LA is interesting to me magically also because it's where Thelema actually began, not with Crowley, but the first Thelemic lodge in the U.S. was the Parsons Lodge, and you can the vibe that is being in the process of being born there is the new Aeon vibe.
Yeah,
that I think will move on now that it's falling apart, but just like everything else in the U.S.
I was out there one time. It's the weirdest thing. Like you just come in contact with weird ass things sometimes. I go out to get dinner one night. I'm walking past an elementary school, and there is a line to get in this elementary school that goes all the way around the block. Like thousands of people are standing in line to get in this elementary school. And I asked somebody, like, what's going on? What's everybody waiting to get in for? They said, James Franco is doing a ritual inside. Like, what kind of ritual?
Yeah.
And nobody really knew. They're like, he's invoking something or doing something or something. I was like, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, he got mixed up with Brian Butler, who was Kenneth Anger's assistant, and was mixed up with them for a while doing these kind of performative Thelemic rituals. But yeah, everyone's into magic there. It is the magic city in a way. Everyone's into this is what it is. Everyone in LA has something on the back burner magically because everyone there believes in like manifestation or new age stuff because they're all trying to make it an entertainment. So they want anything that will help
give them a heads up.
Yeah, and you know, as you know, like artists and musicians and actors and creative people are inclined to magical thinking anyways because what they do for a living. They pretend to be other people or they create vibes as musicians.
Yeah.
But I think that now I'm getting nostalgic for it. It's like I think that LA is Thelema in action. You know, it's every man and woman is a star, right? And it is kind of a new Aeon thing, the process of being. Maybe it's kind of born out of there rather than London.
What you said though, even about getting nostalgic for it, like when you think about it, that's kind of the same thing I feel about New York a lot still. Like I went to see a movie recently. I can't remember the name of it. It's a Korean movie. It's like a love story where the woman ends up moving over here to the U.S. She immigrates to the U.S., ends up going to New York. But you're seeing like all these, you know, the New York City skyline in the background in some of the scenes. And to me, that was always one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen in my life. You know, there were times like I would be on the train headed into New York and I would see that skyline. And it was like, I can't breathe. You know, like it feels like my heart's going to explode.
Gorgeous.
And I feel nostalgic when I see that. But what happens now is I remind myself that's not the place you loved anymore. Like it's dead. It's gone.
That's how I feel about LA.
I have to remind myself of that a lot still.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, at New York, I remember being like, I remember one time I was on the roof of my apartment in Queens, just seeing that skyline, you know, or, you know, one time I was just standing on the roof of the agency I was working at, and it was raining and there was lightning, seeing lightning coming down over the city. It's like, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah.
And the thing that I love about New York is, and I always love so much, is it forces you to be in contact with other people.
Yes.
Like it's a very physical and embodied city and an erotic city where you're constantly on the train, you're like meeting people. And when you meet people, you know you're probably never going to see them again. So you have to establish like an intense emotional connection with them right away. Like that I feel is so healthy. Mm-hmm. And you feel part of humanity there, and not just America, but the whole world. You feel like you're in the center of the world because you are.
Yes.
LA is very emotionally hard because it's the opposite. It is you're always in a car on the freeway, and or at home or at work. And LA is a city where you don't have to be in physical contact with anybody ever.
Yeah.
And that's really bad for people, I think. Yeah. And like I always feel like the actual lived experience of LA is like, it's like you're on the road, you're in traffic, and in the distance you see something, but then you realize it's a mirage, and the closer you get to it, the further away it gets. And that's maybe like being successful or being in the showbiz or whatever. But LA is a city that, contrary to what you would think, because it's like the capital of the entertainment industry, is like completely devoid of human contact and eroticism.
Yeah.
It's just people are like mannequins there.
I always think New York is either going to make you strong or it's going to break you. One of the two, because it's like it feels like a living entity. And I used to think all the time, like when I was riding the train or on the subway, I would think, this is the veins and arteries of this entity we're in, and we are the blood. Like you look at everybody around you, and there's this shared sense of we're all in this together because we're all part of the fabric. We're like individual blood cells in this beast. And that was kind of part of what disappeared after the pandemic too, that sense of we're all in this together, and we're all part of one thing. Mm-hmm. And I had a point to that. I was getting to something, but I lost what it was. That was something I was going to ask you about LA. Oh, the thing about New York making you either strong or breaking you. Another thing about it is one of the reasons, like we were talking about how everybody is working towards something. Nobody stops moving. Like the sharks, you have to keep moving at all times. One of the things, and that shark analogy is dead on, because one of the things that makes you move at all times in New York is, if I get caught slipping for even a second, there are 1 million people younger than me, smarter than me, prettier than me, hungrier than me, that are waiting to step in and take my place at the slightest chance of.
It's like stressful enough.
Yes, you live to pay rent in New York,
and you're paying rent for you're paying a fuck ton of money for like a closet
that you will never own. Yep.
No, not in LA now either. That's another reason I left. Let me ask you this though. I mean, it's like, the question, at least on my mind, has been like, what is going to emerge out of this period? Because, like during the pandemic, I feel like it's almost like The Stand, where it's like everyone was getting pushed around and like almost forced, directed to different parts of the country. It felt like that for me, at least. You left New York, I left LA, lots of people we know left lots of places. A lot of people came to the South. What do you think? And now it's like people have also figured out, to varying degrees, that they might not need to all work in an office together. They can kind of live different places, but also like all the real estate's being bought up by corporations or by foreign investors. What do you think is going to emerge out of this in terms of like whether it's cities that become nexi of activity, or whatever it is, that might emerge from this?
I honestly have no fucking clue. Like I can't see it at all. I can't find a handhold in the world now to see like what the next move is going to be, where it's going to go. I think you've got so many people with so many different agendas who are all kind of tussling to. I think what is happening right now, the world is in labor, and a new world is about to be born. I think that's what all of the strife and all the anguish and everything else that everybody's feeling right now, it's almost like, labor is not a pleasant sensation. In order for something new to be born, there has to be this period of like pain and turmoil and all that sort of stuff. I think that's what we're in. So it's almost like, for me, like trying to guess what the child is going to look like right before it's born. And this is one of those things, too, like I've always said, I'm not a particularly introspective person, or, I don't have a philosophical bent or like when people ask me, what are you thinking about? And I say nothing, I mean, literally nothing most of the time. I'm not thinking about anything. But, like the stuff we were talking about before we got started, just the things like when I was doing magic for hours and hours a day, when I was in Harlem, and you're seeing things and you're going through all these experiences and all this kind of stuff. One of the it's so bizarre looking back in hindsight and talking about the stuff now. Like at one time, I thought it was the only thing in the world that mattered. I thought magic was the only thing that meant anything. And the experiences that I was having while I was doing it, to me, dwarfed at the time anything that could ever happen out here, you could experience out here. You know, this will sound absolutely stark raving insane, but it was like God came to me and talked to me in this little apartment in Harlem.
Doesn't sound right.
3 o'clock in the morning, every morning I'm up doing these rituals, and I'm, you know, I always call them downloads, you know, like you're getting all the stuff and you're seeing all these things, and it's like suddenly the world's making sense to you and you're seeing how it all fits together and clicks together. At that time, if you would have asked me, like, what do you see the world coming to? What's it going to transform into? What's it going to look like? I may have had a better answer, but it was like passing through that, as crazy as it was, like one day, you know, it's like what they call the marriage of the HGA, where once you combine with it, you're not a separate thing anymore. Like you kind of integrated into you. That was what happened to me during that time period. It was like I integrated God into myself, and it was no longer like this external thing that was showing me things and giving me messages and all this. And all of a sudden, from that point on, it was like I never heard from God again.
Yeah.
So now it's like I have no clue what's coming in the world or what it's going to look like or anything else.
Yeah, I couldn't have told. I mean, I never would have predicted that. I never would have lived in the South. I mean, Austin's not exactly
Me
the
either.
South, but it's the gateway. You know, yeah. I mean, or any, you know, I couldn't foresee any of this happening. I think maybe a lot of people have this experience where it's like I felt like prior to the pandemic, I had a script for how my life was going to go, and everything was in place, and you know, it seemed like everything was like, you know, pretty linear and straightforward, and then it just all got smashed.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like, oh, okay, well now I'm on a completely different timeline.
Yeah, exactly. If you would have asked me 3 years ago, like I would have sworn that I was going to live and die in New York. Like I had already said, like, you know, I had told Lori probably within 3 days of being out of prison. I remember we're on the train one day going somewhere, and I told her, if anything ever happens to me, you have to make sure they either bury me here, or if I'm cremated, pour my ashes on the streets. You know, just on the sidewalk, in the street, corner of Broadway and Canal, dump me out so that I'm part of the city forever. I would have never in a million years have foreseen a time when I would leave that place behind.
Yeah.
But it changed. I mean, it in some ways it was sad. You know, it's like when a parent or something dies, or a relationship ends, or whatever it is, there is that element of sadness to it that you have to go through a period of grief. But I also feel like it really did catapult me into a completely new stage of growth that I never would have started on if not for it. Like I never had a driver's license in my life, never owned a car in my life. If I lived in New York, there was no reason to drive. I would have never done that, never learned how to drive. Or even things like taking up martial arts or boxing, or, you know, whatever it is. I never would have started these things if I would not have been pushed out.
Yeah. I know it always sucks at the time, but then you look back and you're like, wow, like
that's why it happened. Yeah.
It is like a birthing process from the universe. But I mean, like for me, and that's how my life has gone for sure. And it's always disorienting. But it's like, you know, I think that there might be kind of something between that and like taking grades. Mm-hmm. You know, you end up in a totally different life.
I think it's an initiation.
Yeah.
That's exactly what most people, when they hear the word initiation, they think it means like you're inducted into a club or a group and you're a member.
That's just to play active.
Yes.
Until it happens.
I always think like what initiation truly is, it's a death and a rebirth. You know, even with baptism, like baptism in Christianity, it's you know, you're initiated into this Christian tradition. Like when you go under the water, it represents you dying and being buried, and when they raise you up, you're raised up into this new life. So initiation, ultimately, when you get down to the core of what it means, it's the old you is dying your old way of living, your old way of thinking, your old way of interacting with the world is dying, and you are being reborn as a new person who's going to interact with reality in a completely different way.
Yeah, that's like the classic formula of all initiation rituals. And one of the other things that I really took from Crowley, and I think was so important, is another one of the things that's buried in his writing, is he talks about the formula of Vayav.
What is that?
So he basically talks about, like, in the quote unquote the old Aeon, the formula of initiation is IAO. It's like the dying and reborn god. And that's the plot of every religion. It's the plot of every movie. You got the hero, then they die, then they're reborn better, and then they're the king now.
Right.
But he said in the Aeon of Horus, it's Vayav, where you have a put a vow at the beginning and the end. And what that is, as we know from Eastern traditions, you already are. The core of what you are is this unbreakable divine essence that everyone has.
Mm-hmm.
But he says in the Aeon of Horus, it's like, no, you die and you're reborn. You die and you're reborn. You die and you're reborn. You just keep doing it over and over and over again because it's fun. And you're the same. Your core essence, your core enlightened essence, is the same through all of those incarnations. But you learn something new about yourself every time.
Yeah.
So he said, like, the formula of Aeon of Horus is not to do the whole suffering and being reborn thing. And he actually completely rejects suffering as, like, at least necessary for spiritual growth. It's a thing that we can do to learn from. But he says that, the Aeon of Horus is the child at play with the universe, and it's this cycle of, like, living all these lives. Like, I've lived so many. I can't even keep track of the number of people I've been now.
Yes.
Like, I can forget whole lives I've lived. Like, I was a cynical ad man. I was a world traveler. I was a writer, I was an addict, I was like all these things, and it's like all of these were different periods of my life. And I think that is kind of like the whole thing about, like, there's like the magic you do in the magic that you do in the temple and the magic you do in your life, and you kind of need both.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's like, it's like when you look at, you were talking about the grades, it's like you look at grades and things like that. It's like, well, it's like, you look at the grade of Netzach, right? And it's like, okay, well, that would be, you're supposed to do all these things and some of these things and do devotional practices. It's like, well, maybe in your life, it's like, the beauty of falling in love and having this, building a relationship with somebody and learning about love at its deepest possible level, and uniting with that person and living with them, and then it falling apart and the pain of losing love, and then you just live, you go through the initiation of that human experience at the deepest level. Like that's what that great. That's what, for me, the tree of life really is the tree of life. It's the tree of life experiences. Mm-hmm. It's not like it's not like you're in a temple doing Venus talismans, although you might be doing that too.
Right.
It's like there's kind of macro and micro levels to these things, and we don't get to pick the macro level.
Right.
I don't think.
Right. I think the suffering thing, I agree. I don't think it's necessary, like for growth and development and all that. I think this is just my own personal opinion, but I think where it usually comes in is most people, for whatever reason, don't want to change. Yeah. They don't want to grow. They want to get to a point where it's like, okay, this is it. I'm not going to struggle anymore. And what happens when you reach that, no matter what that place is, eventually you're going to start stagnating.
Yeah.
The suffering comes because life, God, the universe, however you call it, whatever you want, the way you want to look at it, it doesn't want us to stay. It doesn't want us to stagnate. I think if you take your growth and development into your own hands, mm-hmm. and constantly like put yourself into new situations where you're coming in contact with new people and new ideas and new practices or whatever it is, it's like the growth is going to continue.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to suffer. But it's like when
you're going to suffer no matter what.
That's
like,
true.
It's just part of life.
Old age and everything else.
But I think you don't have to pursue it.
Yes, or cling to it.
Yeah.
Build an identity out of it.
Sure.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's why it's like, and I agree with you. And it's so beautifully put. It's like, and you're talking about change. It's like, yeah, we're talking about Tao, chaos, the Lamb, all this stuff. It's like, it's like this is why I love magic too. It's like you're throwing yourself. You're living life. You're choosing to live life. You're throwing yourself into it, and as Jen used to say, confront every situation, meet every situation head on, mm-hmm. mesh. or the Topi phrase was see a cliff, throw yourself off it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and that's why it's like you kind of meet people who, we were talking about kind of the magic eye metaphor of magic, where it's you get it or you don't. And you kind of meet people who like are literally like, well, I'm such and such great of such and such order, and like I'm gonna curse you with all my powerful demons. And it's like, okay, you it's kind of like I meet people like that, and I'm like, okay, they're there. You are kind of like developmentally challenged. It's like it's kind of like you meet a retarded cat or something like that, and you feel bad for them, and it's like, okay, well, I hope you kind of move through this.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it reminds me that I always think of it as this Zen story I heard about this guy who goes to see the Zen master one time, and he says, I want you to be my teacher. I want to learn from you. And I've read these books, and I've been to this temple, and I've studied under this teacher and all this. And while he's talking, the Zen master's pouring tea, and he keeps pouring and letting the cup start to overflow. And the guy says, what are you doing? It's full. And the Zen master says, exactly. It's like, you've got to empty out all this crap you think you know, because if all that stuff were doing you any good, you wouldn't have come here searching for me. I'll get people like that. It's like they want to tell you, like, everything they know, and all the teachers they've studied with, and the orders they've been part of, and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, that's great, but what do you want from me then?
Yeah, well, I used to be like that too. You know what I mean? It's like, like when I met Jen, I was just like, blah, 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 running my mouth with all this Kabbalah shit.
I think we all do that at some point.
It's a stage you got to go through, because you got to learn that stuff too. I don't think you can get around it, but that's why it's important to have. I think that's another reason why this time period is so. I think this is the golden age of magic. I don't think there's ever been this much access to this stuff.
No,
and not just the writings and the teaching, but you can watch live streams or like listen to podcasts with people talking about it, sharing their lived experience. I remember even in the 90s. It's like, as it's like you read this stuff and you get this build up this mental picture of like, oh, these people must be living in castles, and like, like throwing lightning bolts, and like all these, they must be the Illuminati. And now you like go to their Facebook page, and it's like they're just like posting like, like InfoWars memes and stuff like it's like, it's just like, so now it's like we can, the humanity has been drawn together. I mean, what we all in the 90s used to say, well, 2012 is going to come. Well, what's 2012? 2012 was when everyone's going to become one group consciousness. Well, here you go, for better or worse.
Yeah.
It happened. Now we can see each other. Now we can participate in contact millions of people. It's like that. It's that's the thing. It drives me crazy. People are like, "What magic? There's no magic." I'm like, bro, like you can pick up your phone and summon a magic carpet to take you somewhere. You can have things delivered from across the world the same day. You can merge minds with millions of people in an instant. And like we take it for granted.
Yes.
It's like you can fly in the air to another part of the world. And it's like, what else do you want? I always say, it's like, if you look at any of these old books on magic and all the powers they offer, you can have all those with a cell phone now.
Yes.
Like the magic mirror. Like remember you talk about like sorcerers would have crystal balls where they could talk over sorcerers. Well, you got FaceTime, know? And so then so then the question is like, well, what's the point of magic? It's just old superstition. It's like, no. The point of magic is, how do you deal with all that power? What is the moral and ethical framework for living in a world of gods and monsters? Because we live in a world of magic, of gods, and this idea that there's like, everyone believes in scientific rationalism. No, they don't. I think more people believe in magic now, if you really go out and live in the world, than they do in some Richard Dawkins thing.
Yeah.
We do live in a magical culture. We are in the Animorphs. So now the question is not how do you get power? Because if you have a cell phone, you have more power than any king in the Middle Ages could possibly have dreamed of.
Yes.
The question is now, how do you deal with it? How do you, then you get into questions of spirituality, or you get into questions of like the true will. This is like the Zen Cone of Crowley, I think, where he gives you all this stuff, magical techniques and stuff like that, and he just throws you into it. And I think you have to figure out at a certain point, okay, well, now this works. Well, now what do I do? And you go right back to where you were before, which is like, well, what do I want to do with my life?
Mm-hmm.
And now you have to meditate. Now you're thinking, well, who am I? What's my true will? That's a much harder problem to solve.
Yes. I think one of the things that really kind of struck me, made an impact on me one time, somebody was talking about how during his, like if you believe that Jesus was a real person who was on the earth at one point and was traveling around the Middle East talking, like take all that as a given. if you took into consideration like the area that he lived in, like where all he went while he was teaching, maximum in his life, he would have come in contact with something like 35,000 people in his life. Now, if you have a decent sized Facebook audience, you can reach that many people in a split second.
Yeah, and only 12 people listened to him, and one of them betrayed him. So yeah, it's crazy, right? And it's like I'm of the opinion that God grows just like people, and the God of, it's like, and you can even see God growing in the Bible. It's like God in the beginning of the Bible is a fucking prick. Is like this jealous, possessive, like cruel being, and then by the end, it's like God's like chill. God, like smoke some weed or something because he's like, yeah, we should all love each other. It's like, so God is demonstrating that if even God can grow, that's a lesson to us. And God is the same God. God, whatever God is, infinite intelligence. The great angel of the universe, the golden dawn, whatever word, the words are meaningless, but whatever that higher power is, which I do believe in, I have faith. I'm not saying that in like a super Christian way. I'm just saying that in going through life, I don't think you can really go through life and not believe that there's something higher intelligence that is benevolent.
Yeah.
I mean, the malevolent intelligence is too, for sure, but
the great angel of the universe, is that a golden dawn?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
HUA. They invoke it during before tarot readings.
I didn't know what it meant. I knew the HUA, but I didn't know. I never heard that phrase before. Exactly. That's a really great phrase.
Yeah, I might be mangling it. So
the great angel of the universe.
It's something like that.
That makes so much sense. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and I think that obviously God. I believe whatever God is, obviously it manifests itself to different people in different cultures in different ways. So you get that when you do an Okian. One of the really interesting things about an Okian is you can get 12 people and all have them do an Okian, and they'll all have comparable experiences, but they'll express it in different ways. I mean, you get people that do an Okian and they don't see angels, they see like Star Trek aliens.
Yeah.
That's what was in their mind. That's whatever that is used to talk to them.
Yeah.
Whether you want to believe it's their own unconscious or their soul, if you just want to be psychological about it, fine. So you're going to get the same result.
What you just said, like what we were talking about before we started recording, like just the thing about how, I was talking about that experience where like you see God, but the more you try to look at it and get any defining characteristics, it turns into the devil. And the more you see the devil and you're trying to look and like get any defining characteristics, it turns back into God. A friend of mine who went through the same process that I was talking about, like he didn't see that. He didn't experience that. He said what he experienced, he said he went through like this period where he saw and felt himself like in a life or death battle with himself. And it wasn't like, his perspective went back and forth. Like he was both simultaneous. He said at one point when he got himself down and was about to run himself through with a sword, he said at the exact same time, he felt like this horror and terror and sorrow that his life was about to end, while he felt like this surge of victory and power, like I've overcome this bastard, like both at the same time. Yeah. So it's like we're both doing the same thing, but we're interpreting it, or it's going through different filters in our
It's just let me let in, and come right back down.
Yeah. How y'all doing on here? Just looking what y'all are talking about.
Oh, I just had it.
I'm glad y'all are here.
We're live streaming, by the way. If you need to use the bathroom, by the way, it's upstairs. Yeah,
I probably should. Break. We will be back in just a couple of seconds. We're both going to run to the bathroom. Hey, Blazing Star. Hey, guys. Sunshine. Hello. So I will be right back with y'all in just a minute. And hopefully you're getting something useful out of this. Thank you, Max. All right, be right back.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi, yes. I don't know if you've ever had district donuts before. Hello.
I'm the only one that
None of these are gluten-free. It can be crazy and I found it.
Yes, you found it. Is that still streaming?
I don't know. I don't need more coffee.
Not nitro.
I had like literally like 3 shots of espresso
Have a nitro. It's right
and a
here.
Vietnamese
Drink
coffee.
it.
I don't get that right
Yeah,
now.
you can have it later.
If I get that, if I drink that right now, I'm gonna be like anxious for the rest of the day. I'm gonna be shaking,
The rest of the week.
convulsing. I'll feel misleading.
Yes.
This is a very popular donut chain here. I didn't realize he had a gluten allergy, but donuts here have fun with that.
There's blueberry. Is that the Simpsons donut?
No, it's not.
Okay.
But District Donuts is a very popular donut chain down here.
Cool.
I'm probably gonna.
Yeah, they really did put sticky notes on everything.
You know what?
They really did put those sticky notes on everything.
I know, right? They all have their
Rachel is
information.
yelling at us all the time.
They're all passive aggressive.
It's like they don't really want you in their house.
Well, these are gluten free.
I'll take one of those.
Just take it with you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, very good.
You want some tea also or anything?
Oh, I'm good. I still got.
Okay, cool. All right.
Oh, all right, guys, we're back.
Okay, so there's a switch on that mic that should always be up. You're good with that, right? Yeah.
What do I do? Do I push anything?
Just don't push it down.
Okay, don't push it down.
Yeah.
So I'm still good. It's still
You're
on.
good. Yeah.
Very good. All right. What were we talking about?
I remember one thing that I was going to riff on from before. I can't remember what we were just talking about, but you were saying that something to the effect of you get your best information from not obvious medical sources,
Right.
and I definitely believe that. It's like it's like a cult means hidden, and hidden means hidden. It doesn't mean go to that section of the bookstore and you're going to get all the secrets, right? And it's like one thing I tell my students sometimes is, or just people who want to know about magic, like my number one advice to them is don't read fucking occult books. You have to also, but for me, the core axioms of Hermeticism is that everything is one thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that can go too far into a schizophrenic direction. But it's like when I was researching for my John Dee book, it's like you really get into the belief systems of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment that produced the Western esoteric tradition, and it's completely coherent. It's like they have all that order of the stars and planets, and that's a huge part of it. But they also say, their conception of it in Elizabethan England, the Hermeticists was, there's 3 books. There's the book of God, which is the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
There's the book of the book of Scripture, the book of, I think, just learning in the world. I forget what it's called. You have the book of the Bible, the book of learning in the world. Or excuse me, the book of Scripture, the Bible, the book of the soul, which is your own being that you learn from yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and the book of nature. And that's all of this. And this is God talking to you. The whole point of the doctrine of correspondences and signatures, like you read these books where it's like, well, vervain means this, and
Right.
hensbane means this. It's like, well, what they're saying is that, in the words of the great magician Morrissey, nature is a language, can't you read? It's like these are all symbols that are telling us different things, and you get that with like the Oath of the Abyss, where you take everything as a direct message to you, and it's just like, and the way that I would put it is, pay attention. It's like this that you're in is teaching you all the time. If you want to learn magic, ask the universe to teach you magic, and this will teach it to you. You don't need a book, you don't need a teacher, although that is very helpful to get started and to structure it so you know what to look for. But initiation also means to start. It doesn't mean finish. It means to hit the pilot light. And sometimes you need someone to come along. Sometimes you need someone to come along and like get your gas burner going, like to be able to light your stove. Sometimes you just light it yourself, and you need someone to just to validate, like, yeah, you did it. Like that's important too. But
you think you've had a lot of people like that throughout your life?
I was fortunate to. Yeah, I had a ton. I mean, I sought out teachers. I was in IoT for a long time. Then I found, I met Jen. I had tons of Eastern gurus. I had gurus in India, in Nepal. I mean, but I spent like 10 years actively seeking it out and doing the whole like Batman Begins thing, where it's like you go seek the teachers. But because I also put myself in the position early on of writing about it, so I was like, well, I've got to fucking get it right then, and that means like I better put a lot of information in. Like I got to read everything, I got to know everything, I have to experience everything. So, but it's like for me, it's kind of like what I was saying about grades, where it's like you go through a grade and it's a life experience. The universe is teaching you something. And I structure all of that through the Western esoteric tradition and the Kabbalah, and that brings a lot of, having structure for your experience brings a lot of peace and understanding and calmness, I think. Because, one of the things that makes people more anxious than anything else is thinking that there's no order to their life or the universe. Like that's horrible. Like you can go through terrible things, but it's like if it's for meaning, there's meaning to it. I think it was somebody, Viktor Frankl or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you read this. He was saying something like, mankind can bear almost any what if he has a why. I'm probably not. But you know what I'm talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyways, I'm kind of rambling, but it's like for me, you start off with magic with reading these books and trying to master these systems, and that stuff is amazing. But then for me, at a certain point, I got to a point where I see everything as a magical system. I see the world as complex systems waiting to be mastered. It's like if you want to learn if you want to be president, the world is presenting you with systems that you can go learn and master the political system and become Joe Biden. I don't want to, but somebody does. That's their true will, right? It's like there's these systems that you can study obsessively and master. It's like if you want to be good at any career, it's like, well, go get the books that tell you how to do it. If you want to be a great cook, like I had this conversation with Duncan once where like he came over to my house and I cooked for him, and he was like, "You're a really good cook." And I was like, "Well, I just followed the instructions in the book." And for some reason, he was like, "That's mind blowing." I'm like, well, it's like somebody, no matter what you want to do in life, somebody else has already done it and left instructions. So all you have to do is follow the instructions, and you'll get the same result, just the same as magic.
People will complain sometimes, like about, like say the cost of books or whatever. They'll talk about, I don't want to pay $25 for a book, and I always say, you're not paying $25 for a book. You're paying $25 for all of this person's life experiences in this genre of whatever it is they're talking about, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes they did. They're giving you like tremendous shortcuts for $25.
Yeah. I mean, I say that to obviously, like as you do, I do this for a living. So, but I tell people like, people get, I have classes you can pay for, and people are saying, well, magic should be free. And I say, well, it is. You can go learn it. I'm not going to stop you. No one needs to take my courses. I don't care. But, if you want to skip 20 years of painful mistakes that I made, maybe it's worth, a few bucks that you're going to spend on PlayStation games anyways. So,
Yes. That's even when I came to magic, like when I did start writing about it, the thing that I always thought is I'm not like some great super genius that's going to show anybody anything that hasn't already been said before, hasn't already been done before, hasn't probably been articulated 100 times better than I can do it. All I was trying to do was take all of these things that in the beginning confused the fuck out of me and strip all of like the archaic language out of it and just simplify it. Make it so simple that anyone can do it. It's not anything new. Like you can learn, you don't have to buy my books or listen to anything that I say or anything else. You can find it all out there in the world for free. Mm-hmm. All I'm trying to do is make it easier to take in and assimilate and integrate and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that the beauty of our age is that we have access to all this information, but also the downside is that we have all this access to this information. We don't know what's important and what's not. And it's meaningless because it's all easy to get. I mean, like when I was starting, it was fucking hard to find this stuff. You really had to look, you know, I'm sure you remember. It's like, and I remember talking to some of my teachers, like one of my teachers said, like in the 60s, she had to go all over the US to find one book by Gurdjieff. And it was like in a university library and they like watched her while she read it with like gloves on. It's like you couldn't even get access to Crowley's books until recently. You get maybe one or two.
Yes.
The Book of Thoth and Magic Without Tears, but like you couldn't read the whole thing.
But what changed with that also though is like when it was that way, like when we were growing up.
And that's something.
Yes. Like when you got one of those books, it was like a valued possession. Like you cherished that thing. You probably read it over and over and over. Now it's like people go out and buy all of Crowley's stuff in one trip to the store, put it on a shelf, and never crack the covers up.
I remember I got, I found a copy of Libernal and Psychonaut, and I was like, this is the secrets of the universe. And I spent the next 7 years just with that book, you know, and like, there's not even really a whole lot of content in that book, you know, but at the time it was so mind blowing. And so like, for me, that was a big part of it, just finding the information. And then so that's why I became passionate about putting the information out. So because I wanted more people to have the experiences come to the party, you know?
Yeah.
And the other thing is like, I think sometimes it's like, we can't take for granted that it's going to be like this forever. They could shut down the internet so fast, you know, and it could go back to, and then I tell people hoard books too, because now like they're editing all the books to make them like more compliant with how people want politics to be now. Like, they're editing all of the James Bond books. They're editing the Roald Dahl books to change the text because they don't think it's politically correct. And there's a lot of books that you can't find anymore. It's hard to find David Icke's books, you know, the old one. Been able to have to just edit people out of the conversation. It's actually pretty scary, despite having all this information. So I tell people hoard information digitally and hoard books too, because let's say the internet goes down. People always say like, well, there could be an EMP pulse, but like whatever. Let's say that just like the government like decides like, you know, let's say the government just tolls the internet where you got to pay $400 if you want the full a month if you want the full internet. Well, not everyone's going to be able to afford that.
Right.
You know, what if, and how do you know the stuff on the internet hasn't been altered?
Right.
It's the internet is like simultaneously the greatest liberatory, well, it was the greatest liberatory tool. Now it's the greatest tool for control the world has ever known.
See, I started to think and feel the same way, not just about books and information, but about music too. You know, at first I'm thinking all of these, you know, platforms that come out, like whether it's Apple Music or Spotify or whatever it is that people listen to music on, like, that's great. You can have the whole, you know, library of the world's music in your hand at all times. But then you get somewhere where you don't have internet, or if something happens to the internet, and I started thinking, I better get a record player. Now I understand why people are still collecting vinyl. It's like, even without the internet, you're still going to be able to use those records.
It's got a different feel to it also. It's
it does. It feels more alive in some way.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Yeah.
It's like I still have my dad's old records and stuff like that, and I'll play them, and I'm like, I'm listening to the same sound wave that my dad was listening to in 1973. You know? Yes. That's I mean, if you think about
that's kind of magic. Yeah. I mean, when you're you know, I can't remember who it was that described this to me, but it was like so dead on for some of the experiences that I went through. They were talking about whenever you, like, say, however you want to phrase it, like approach the throne of God, whatever it is, like you're seeing a place, experiencing a place, going to a place, however you want to say it, that is beyond the boundaries of time and space. It is outside of those boundaries. So at the moment you are experiencing that, it's like you are standing shoulder to shoulder with the prophets, like Ezekiel and Daniel and John the Revelator, like you're standing because you're outside of time. There is no past anymore. So you are with them experiencing what they're experiencing while they're experiencing it. Same way with listening to those records, listen to that same sound wave. It's almost like you are standing outside of space and time, at least on certain levels of reality. Maybe not the physical world. You're still, definitely aging, but same principle.
That's crazy. One thing that always blows my mind is sound waves never go away. Like we're talking right now and everyone is listening to this, like those sound waves are going out into the air and they will never go away. They just get smaller over time.
Wow.
Like that's nuts to me.
Yeah. I never.
Somewhere all those somewhere Jesus' sermons are still echoing away. Somewhere Hitler's speeches are still echoing in the air. So
wow.
It's pretty nutty.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Maybe I'm angling that too. I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting what you're saying. I mean, let me ask you this. Do you ever get the sense that we read about these great magicians or spiritual teachers in the past or spiritual figures? Do you ever get the sense that they're not dead?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think whenever you, especially when you start to get into the areas of magic where you're having all those, this stuff sounds so crazy, and it's part of why I don't even like talking about it anymore, because it just makes you sound like a Fruit Loop, like you're one of those people that get lost in cosmic woo-woo, and, it's just some of it just sounds so ridiculous, but yeah, absolutely.
Unless you're talking to someone who's had the same experience. I mean, I think that's part of it too. It's like you're talking about in Pokemon and all that. It's like the curse of the magazines. You have to talk. People are going to think it's total gibberish. And since it comes down from the abyss, people will interpret it opposite to what you meant, which is what happened to Jesus, obviously, so. And
I think also it sounds kind of like egoic in certain ways. Like with Crowley, when Crowley came out and he said, okay, I'm a secret chief.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, yeah, okay, whatever. Same way if you came out today and I'm a secret chief, you post that on your Twitter account or whatever. Yeah. It's like
I should do that. Actually, just lean into it.
I think the thing is what I have come to understand and experience through my own practice is that we literally are the secret chiefs. What the way that my brain interpreted whenever I was seeing these things and understanding these things. Did you ever see that movie with Matthew McConaughey where he's going to space or something?
Interstellar.
Is that what it was? Where he thinks his house is haunted because he's hearing a knocking.
Yeah.
But then it turns out that it's actually him knocking.
Yeah.
What I saw is that's what the secret chiefs are. I asked somebody one time, it didn't occur to me for years to ask this, because I thought, when you're talking about the Golden Dawn system of magic, or, even some of the stuff from what's the guy's name, the philosopher, the Neoplatonist, and all of this kind of stuff. When you're talking about these things and you really start to understand them, you're like, Jesus Christ, this isn't something that people, and whether this is true or not, I don't know. This is just what I started to feel. This isn't something that developed over time, that evolved. This is something that we were given. Even the Golden Dawn, they said, this isn't something we created. This was given to us from some outside source, from the secret chiefs. And it's not that we're evolving it and discovering more of it. If anything, it's that we're losing some of it as we go through time.
That's what John Dee believed. I think
that's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's the exact same thing that I came to believe just from the things I saw and that I experienced, is that we are the secret chiefs. We gave ourselves this information. It's almost like being called. Did you ever see that movie Lucy, where Scarlett Johansson, she takes this drug that opens up her consciousness or whatever, and she becomes almost omnipotent and all powerful, and she's trying to figure out, okay, that's great, but what do I do with this? And she meets Morgan Freeman, who's a scientist, and he says, the only thing that any of us ever do with this, pass it on.
Yeah.
So she goes back in time to the very first human coming up out of the primordial whatever that's still 3/4 ape, and she passes the information in the form of energy onto this thing. I think that's the exact same thing that we have and are still going through with the secret chiefs, or whatever name you want to call them. They had different names for them in other cultures. Sure. I think it's us. I think we gave ourselves this information, and we're kind of in this repeating loop where we're having to learn what we already know because we took it back and gave it to ourselves.
That
I know
makes a lot
that
of
sounds
sense.
crazy.
Not to me, not at all. I think, yeah, when I really think about this stuff, I was talking to Greer about John Michael Greer about this, and we were talking about, the broadly political factions of magic. The left wants to progress into the future. The right wants to see it as degenerating from the past. But I don't think either one is actually fully true. I think everything is happening now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, for instance, like I've had experiences where I'm reading just the New Testament and I'm reading or the Confessions of St. Augustine, and I just had this experience. I was reading the Confessions of St. Augustine, who was a pagan academic or something like that, and then he converted to Christianity. And there's this part where he's just talking about being out basically on a Saturday night and seeing people drunk and passing out and just like how the horrible things people do to themselves. And I was like, he's talking about now. Or I was reading the New Testament and Christ is telling his parables, and just like, you have the shift where it's like, he's not talking about, everything he's talking about is happening now. Mm-hmm. It's all happening all the time. Or even to be like more literal, it's like with the secret chiefs thing, it's like, like Buddha, okay, let's say Buddha's a secret chief. I think anyone in the world would agree with that. Mm-hmm. Or he's an enlightened person, right? It's like, well, okay, so you have Buddhism that's like, there's the Buddhist tradition of people doing all these academic things and rituals and stuff like that. But it's like, man, like you can go anywhere in the world and there's like people have Buddhas on their dashboards. You can go to a head shop and there's like Buddhas everywhere. And it's like that energy is still pervasive, almost like it's everywhere. It's pervasive, even in physical form, almost as densely as like a certain plant species. It's part of our reality. It's part of even that we physically see. Or like, I was thinking this the other day, it's like we just went to a head shop. And I think head shops are really interesting because, well, I'm interested by anything in our culture that is considered lesser than. Mm-hmm. It's like not okay. And that could be like trashy comics or literature, head shops, drug culture. It's like anything that's passed over by, the mainstream culture, like the people who are like watching CNN and like reading The Atlantic and being very literary and all that. Like that's all boring ass horseshit to me. But the parts that are considered not okay, people from the wrong side of the tracks, that's where you'll get all the information. Mm-hmm. And that's part of initiation too. You got to go to places that people don't think to look for information. But like we were in a head shop and it's like, you go to a head shop and the gods, there's a Sekhmet statue right there we got at it. And it's like, they're showing you, these are the things people interact with in altered states of consciousness. They're showing you the gods are here right now. And it's like, you've been walking around the city, there's Tupac art everywhere. I'm like, wow, I realized it's like, Tupac is in the process of becoming an ascended master. Yes. That sounds like a joke and like ridiculous, but I think that's true. I say other than I think that everything is happening now. And I don't mean that in like a be here now, man kind of way, but just like literally, this is God talking to us and it will show you everything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, a huge part of it is just learning how to pay attention to it. And I always think also, when we're talking about, in magic, we always talk about the great work, like completion of the great work, which you can never truly complete because the great work is like, striving for perfection in all ways, like so that God can express itself through us to its fullest extent. We're trying to perfect ourselves mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, so that we are a more complete vehicle for God to express more of itself through. And there's always going to be room for improvement in some kind of way. So it's like we think of magic as just, doing rituals in a dark room or reading books on the occult or whatever it is. But really, pretty much everything you do in this world is something that is advancing you towards, being closer to completing the great work. Whether it's learning how to do your taxes, that doesn't seem like a particularly magical thing.
No, that's what I mean about seeing the world as all these like systems to obsessively learn.
Yes.
They're not scary anymore.
Yes, absolutely. And it's like all of them that you learn, you're improving yourself in some way.
You might want to plug this in, by the way. Like
is it about to go dead? Very good. All right, let me see.
This might be tricky. I don't think there's any extension cords.
Probably not.
How far does that stretch?
Not very far at all.
Well, you could theoretically put it here, I could turn around.
That's true. So y'all might be seeing us from a different angle. If you still want to stick with us for a little while.
So let me turn this around.
Go. I think that's working. Second. Mixing it up. Yeah, that is a great staircase. This entire, what is this, a house? It's not really an apartment. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this whole place is pretty amazing, actually. Mara says it's like cribs. Okay, very good. So y'all might be seeing us from a different angle, but at least you'll be able to hear it. Didn't want y'all to miss anything that you might find interesting.
I guess we gotta turn this couch around.
Yeah. Oh, it's not too heavy. Okay, great.
House rearranging.
Yes. We even moved the couch around so that you can still see our faces. Yeah, sorry, Friend Water. You said the sound is going in and out. I did not bring a microphone or anything, so we just kind of have what we have.
I will have the audio on my podcast.
Jason said he is going to have
Next week.
the audio on his podcast next week. So if you are missing anything, you'll be able to hear it through the podcast. Thank you, Max. I was hoping y'all would like this, that it's, just something out of the ordinary from just, me sitting around rambling about stuff. Thanks, guys. Thanks. Just wanted to do something a little bit different, and Jason was in town, asked if I would do his podcast. I said, good. Thank you, MK Ultra. No, this is not my house. Yes, we are in New Orleans, but this is not my house. Yeah, we met for the first person. We met for the first time in person at the last court hearing, where I had to go whenever they were arguing about whether they were going to do the DNA testing or not. Thank you, Andrew. But Jason actually made the trip, drove all the way to Arkansas to be there for the hearing, which I greatly appreciated. So I figured the least I could do is return the favor and do the podcast while he's here in town. Yeah, exactly, Blazing Star. When people go out of their way, when they spend a lot of time and energy, to show support to me in some way, I don't take that lightly. I've learned through my life how valuable stuff like that is, because to be honest, most of the people we meet aren't going to do that for us. When you get into really hard times, that's when you see, who's really going to be there to help you and who's only going to be there when it's good or easy. Yeah. Yes, Max. Thank you, Jimmy Joe. Yeah, so I like to be there. Yeah, fair weather friends, exactly. But I like to, if I am able to, be there for people who are there for me. And Jason was one of those people.
Thank you. Okay.
Which one was me? Okay, very
right.
Yeah, so if you are missing anything, if you're not hearing anything, the sound's cutting in and out, you'll be able to hear the entire thing on Jason's podcast next week.
Okay, there we go. There we go. All right, look, we've switched places. All right, no, yeah, I'm really grateful again, David, for taking the time.
Oh, that's what I was just telling people when you were upstairs. That's the same way I felt. I was telling them about how you made the trip. At great personal expense for yourself. Time, energy-wise, money, everything else to make the trip all the way to Arkansas whenever, I was going through that hearing. And that's some traumatic shit, to be honest. Having to go back in.
You look pretty upset.
It does something to you. It like going back in there, you were talking a while ago about how you've been so many different people, you've lived so many different lives.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way, even just like in the 10 years that I've been out, like I've done so many different things. And when I try to remember back to the person I was, like during those times, it's like it's literally not the same person.
So did you feel like when you went back into that situation, you were like going back to all
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Yes. It was almost like being forced into, a skin that isn't yours.
Yeah.
Forced into trying to be a person that you're not.
Yeah, you looked not happy.
Yeah.
That was a trip too, because it was like, I think as I mentioned, like we showed up and it was like us, I forget his name, but the singer from Lamb of God. And
Randy.
And kind of just like a bunch of like goths and stuff like that. And there's like dudes out here like preparing for like to go to like, Civil War, like just strapped with body armor and like big like ARs, and it's just like riot gear. And it's like, what do you think is gonna happen out here?
Well, I think
just straight intimidation.
I don't think that they even thought anything was gonna happen as much as they wanted to intimidate people.
Yeah, like they were doing the thing where they were gonna form a row and like beat the hell out of everyone forward, or they were looking like they could do that.
I mean, that's like even in prison, they give lip service to things like lowering the recidivism rate, stuff like that. But did we talk about this the other day?
Briefly. Yeah.
How they know that the more connections and support you have in the outside world, the less likely you are to come out to prison. So they do everything they can to intimidate and make the people that come to see you as uncomfortable as they possibly can, to separate you from any kind of support system. Number one, because then they can do anything they want to do to you. And there are no witnesses, nobody can do anything about it or anything else. But two is because they just don't want people seeing what goes on inside the system.
Did you interact with the private prison system at all?
I didn't, but Jason Baldwin did. He was in one for a little while. And from what I heard, it got so horrific that they actually had to outlaw private prisons in Arkansas. You had guys that had been in there for years and had not even been issued a pair of shoes because they didn't want to cut into the profit margin of the prison. That
to me, I already feel it's like a system, but that's slavery, which is modest. The private prison system is horrifying, and also like how little people are allowed to know about it.
Yes.
And at least from my understanding, it's like, once you're in there, it's like you're in the black hole. Like, there's no like accountability.
I mean, think about the fact that you could have major riots taking place at, a dozen prisons at any given time all over the U.S. Nobody out here will ever hear a word about it. There's almost like this agreement between like the prison industrial complex and the media and the political system to not speak about anything going on in there. Number one, it makes it look like, makes them look bad, like they're losing control of the situation and whatever it is. But nobody out here has any clue what's going on inside those walls at any given time.
I would imagine illegal to film or anything like that.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the same in, it always blows my mind. It's like illegal we're not allowed to know how our food is processed. It's illegal to film in slaughterhouses or farms or anything like that, factory farms. It's, I don't know, tell me how you feel about this, but I always got the feeling that slavery in the U.S. didn't exactly end. It just kind of rebranded as the prison system. How do you feel about that?
That's exactly what happened. Because the prisons have all these contracts to basically pimp out prison labor, but also contracts with all these big corporations to take advantage of not just the people in prison, but their families also. Like they'll do, like on one end of the spectrum, you'll have these companies that hire out prison labor to do certain things. You know, like say farms or something, where they'll bring in prisoners to pick crops or whatever it is. But then you also have these companies that do things like, you know, if the prison makes a contract with one company, then that company has a monopoly. Like say the phone system, for example. Whatever phone company they make a contract with in the prison, that is the only phone company there. So they can charge anything they want to charge for phone calls. When I was in prison, a 15-minute phone call to the outside world cost $25.
What?
15 minutes for $25.
Okay.
Who in prison can afford that? There's no rich people in prison. And once again, not only is it about getting the money, but it's also about, you know, that whole recidivism thing, making it impossible for you to continue to have relationships and contact.
So even the state, you know, non-private, the public sector wants people in prison for profit.
Yes. Lori spent her entire life savings on phone calls with me when I was in prison. And everything she had saved in her entire life up until that time was spent on phone calls.
Wow. Yeah, I know, like, people love to yell about fascism these days, but it's like, you know, it's like you look at the actual definition of fascism is the merger of state and corporate power. It's like, well, here you go. Like, this is what we're living in.
Yes.
Yeah, that's.
And even like in Arkansas, they don't pay you anything. Different states pay different amounts for prison labor. You know, and in some states it's like 5 cents an hour, literally five. Like you get a nickel an hour. In Arkansas, it's nothing. Like it's literally slave labor. Like you get nothing.
Wow. And
they charge you still for everything. If you need to see a doctor or a dentist or anything like that, you get charged for that. So what they do is if you don't have any money, they put that, you know, they call it in your books or in your file or whatever it is, so that if anyone in the outside world ever does send you any money, they take it and say, no, you owe us this because you saw a doctor 2 years ago.
Jesus. Are you still working on, I think you were talking about after you had that experience, you were working on maybe changing the laws at the national level?
That's what we're wanting to hopefully do, push something through. You know, like right now, what we're saying is all we're asking is to let us do this DNA testing. We're not even asking the state to pay for it. We're saying we'll do like a crowdsourcing thing, whatever it is, some way we'll come up with the money. You know, enough people want to see an answer to this case, want, you know, like definitive proof of who exactly did this, that people would be willing to pay for this testing just to get the answer once and for all. So it's not going to cost the state anything. All we're saying is get out of the way and let us do this. And they're essentially arguing, well, since you're out of prison now, you no longer have the right to do that. So I'm not the only one in this situation. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things when I was arrested in '93, they couldn't do the same kind of DNA testing that they can do now. So you have people in prison right now who could have DNA testing done that would prove that they're innocent, but the state still fights against it. So what we want to have done is the law changed so that it just says you can do this whether you are in prison or out, as long as you're willing to take on the expense and not cost the state resources.
That would be incredible. I mean, it really, like, just for me, like, being there and witnessing just the environment and the attitude of people, I mean, it was just so blatantly corrupt. And, I mean, it really says it all. If you're, like, going and trying to pay for everything just to have the testing done, and they're basically treating you in the manner that they did, I mean, it pretty much says it all.
Yeah.
But do you think, I would imagine, I mean, you think basically that they don't want to do that because they don't want to open themselves up to being sued or just getting bad publicity?
Yeah, all of the above. I think bad publicity, they don't want to be sued. And to be honest, I also think they know who did it. Mm-hmm. And I think they don't want that information coming out.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a whole tangle of bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if, you know, keep in mind, a lot of people built careers for themselves off of this case. Mm-hmm. You know, they went on to, like, the judge runs for, you know, a seat on the Arkansas Supreme Court, or the judge during the case went on to become a senator in Arkansas. You know, like a lot of people built careers for themselves off of the publicity that they gained from this case. So if it comes out that not only did you sentence an innocent person to death, 2 more guys to life in prison without parole, and that you let a child murderer walk the streets free for all these years, not only all of that, but that it was somebody connected to you this whole time, then there's going to be hell to pay for that. And they know that. You're talking about a lot of lives and careers being unraveled.
What's your next step with all that?
Right now, we just filed the final appeal. Time kind of runs together for me out here now, but it was sometime within the last couple of weeks. Like, we're working on this stuff still, like almost daily, working on this case. So we finally got the appeal filed. All we're doing right now is waiting for the courts to come back and decide whether they're going to hear the case or not. And this is the thing, this is completely unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever been done before. So we don't know what's going to happen. They could come back and say, okay, we're going to set a hearing and you're going to have to come to court again and argue in front of us why or why not this should be done. Or they could just come back and say, we read the case, it's blatantly obvious that this should be done, so go ahead and do the testing. Or they could come back and say, nope, we don't have to give you a reason why, we're just saying you're not doing it. So, I mean, it could be anything. We have no idea what to expect. You know, you would think in a world where someone on the court system had even a shred of morality or integrity or anything else, that this would be a given.
Right.
But we thought that many times over the years in this case, and it just wasn't true.
Yeah, some of the between that and some of the things you're talking about the monopolization of like the financial exploitation in prison, like the $25 phone calls, the way they set up the system. It just, I think, I would hope at least for the average person, it's really hard to think about being in the mindset of somebody who says, but yeah, this is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like even to the point where like you can't really say like, oh, like do the Eichmann thing where you're like, oh, I was just doing my job. Like this, it's hard to look at that stuff and not just see calculated malevolence.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I believe that 100%. I mean, think about it. Just from a magical perspective, say, we're talking about the energy of place while we go. So you've got a lot of different things that combine, that come together to create the energy of a place. Like you've got, like natural, like whatever you want to call it, like ley line type energy, like I forget what the word is, but like energy that's inherent within the earth itself, just like chi within our bodies. So you've got that. Then you've got the history, like you said, sound waves go forever. So you've got the history of everything that happened there, every word that was ever spoken there. All of that energy combines into it. Well, think about the fact that, like, one of the worst examples, there was a guy in the cell next to mine that had actually climbed into two old women's window one night and hacked them to death with a hatchet so that he could steal their Social Security checks. I was in a super maximum security unit prison with between 2,000 and 3,000 people like that. Think about the kind of morphic field, the kind of energy that
I can think about it, but I can't imagine what that would be like.
Think about what it's like attracts like.
Sure.
So imagine the sort of people it draws to work in that environment, like a magnet. It draws its own kind. We used to say in prison, the only difference between guards and prisoners is they have the keys.
One of the hardest questions, I think, in magic and just spirituality in general, in life in general, is the question of evil. Like, what is evil? Why does it exist? Where does it come from? What are your thoughts on that?
The only, this is, once again, this is just kind of my own conclusions that I've come to. The way that I usually see it, honestly, I think evil and ignorance are almost synonymous. I think usually when people are doing evil shit, they're doing it out of a state of ignorance. Either because, and it could be all different kinds of ignorance. It could be ignorance, like say somebody goes out and kills someone that they don't even know just because they're going to, ransack through their pockets and hope they get $50 or whatever it is. It's ignorance of the fact that like we are one consciousness. Like we may be in separate ways, but we are one unified consciousness beyond this illusion of duality. So they're operating from the state of ignorance that they don't even realize that, it's like Jesus said, whatever you do to other people, you do to me. Like, that's not a metaphor, that's a literal thing.
Yeah.
So they're acting from the state of ignorance that they don't even realize that, they're doing something that is harming not only you, but themselves and all of humanity as a whole. Just from, and I think that's the case all the way down the line to even when you talk about the most vile people, like the guy crawling in the women's window and hacking them with the hatchet. I think stuff like that, it always comes from ignorance in some way. Even if it seems like malevolence, like this person has no reasoning for anything they do other than, I want to make somebody else's day as fucking miserable as mine is. Even that, I think it ultimately comes from a state of ignorance. But that's just, I thought a lot about that in prison.
Yeah. That's a very Eastern perspective. I forget I think it's Thomas or something like that in Sanskrit in India. Evil and ignorance are considered the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But and I would agree with you, but then it does seem that there are intelligent evil actors. Like there are people who, for whatever reason, are choose somebody just like you or I, who's choosing to be evil.
Yes.
Intelligently.
Yes.
And you could point at people like, it's hard not to, like obviously people can be like that from ideology. So you can point at like terrorists or certain politicians, Dick Cheney, I don't know. But also you could look at people like, I was just trying to think of an example of that. Like somebody like, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, he's going around and is a serial killer, ritualistic, and it's just like, or Ted Bundy, like the people who are reveling in what they're doing. You have people who are intelligent evil actors, and that the question of evil is such a theological stumbling block because we all hear people who say like, how could God, that I don't believe in God because how could God permit this to exist? And different spiritual traditions have different answers to this, and some are more satisfying than others, but I don't think any are ultimately fully satisfying.
No.
And so like if we just take the phenomenon of, and this goes all the way down to legislation. It's kind of like, I think the essence of, if I really think about the essence of liberalism versus conservatism, it's an argument of nurture versus nature, where people who are liberals will say if people do bad things, it's because of socioeconomic factors, it's because how they were raised, they are, various chemical factors that they didn't get what they needed. But that argument also breaks, and also the conservative argument, everyone is just born a certain way. And that's obviously horseshit because people change all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But they both, like it's kind of, these arguments break down when you see somebody who is obviously intelligent and is intelligently evil.
I see exactly what you're saying. But one other thing that I would also throw in is like when you're talking about on the end of the spectrum that includes people like, say, Richard Ramirez and Night Stalker, stuff like that. Honestly, like when I was in prison, one of the things that kind of blew my mind is like if you get your idea of like who's in prison and what they're like from media sources, whether it's movies or books or whatever, you go in thinking, prison is full of like all these Hannibal Lecter types, these super genius, just. Right. But when you get in there, one of the things I realized pretty quick was the average death row inmate has an IQ of 85.
Okay.
And that's average, so you got a lot of people who are lower than that. So it's like, even when you're talking about intelligent, it's like there's intelligence and there's intelligence. And sometimes those guys might seem like they're intelligent when you see them for like a 30-second news clip or something like that. But when you're dealing with them in real life, you realize you're dealing with people who just aren't hooked up right.
I see.
Like there's stuff misfiring in there and all kinds of stuff like that. So I don't think you can always take those people as highly intelligent. But, once again, I don't know. I think I used to think a lot about this stuff, but it's hard to remember that person now.
Yeah.
And now I don't really think about.
It's not fun to think about.
Yeah. It's like somebody asked me one time, they're like, why aren't you pissed off about being in prison? And it's like, I don't have time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I can either sit around and think about like the things that people did to me that were fucked up and I can get angry about it or whatever, or I could be going and eating some ice cream. It's like, I'm going to choose the ice cream.
Yeah.
You know, and it was kind of so far back there now. And like you said, you go through all of these incarnations in a single lifetime, which I also think is I think magic is part of that. I don't think everybody does that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you.
I think, you know, I heard somebody told me one time that like magic, even for flaws and the stuff that can go wrong in it, magic aims to do to your consciousness in a single lifetime what some of these other traditions aim for over multiple.
I read it. This was just on an old website, but this is an old film right from the 60s. What's his name? Father Shiva wrote some really interesting books. He said that he had kind of a theosophical bent on things, but he said when you become a magician, what you're actually doing is, it's like most people are kind of going on this evolutionary spiral. It's like lifetime after lifetime after lifetime for a long time, if you believe in that model. And I do, just from my own experiences and corroborating certain. And I actually think it's linear, actually. But when you become a magician, when you take on the great work, whatever that, in a true sense, whatever that actually means, you're volunteering to accelerate your karma. So you have to burn a fuck ton in one lifetime.
Yes. And I think part of that process, like a side effect of that process, is exactly what you were describing. You look back at yourself and it's like you went through multiple lifetimes in one lifetime. You were many different people in one lifetime because of that acceleration.
Yeah. And there's awesome things about that, but there's also very sad things about that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's you know, there's a lot of people that aren't in my life anymore, you know, or jobs that I like, or people that I were that I liked, that I wanted to be. Yeah. And I think in that's one thing that's made me really appreciate. I think the people who maintain, the people who are in your life throughout multiple of those incarnations are obviously like, that's who you're meant to be spending.
Yeah.
That's who you're you know, your, whatever you want to call it, your soul group. You know, those are the people that truly care about you. Because everyone else will be off in another movie.
Even then, though, it's kind of like, you know, even when the person does stick with you and you've been together, you know, like all those years or whatever, it's so bizarre even realizing that it's like you don't have exactly the same relationship. Like even, it's not like you went through all of these lifetimes and they went through all of these lifetimes, but it's like the relationship itself went through like several different incarnations.
Yeah.
You know, like maybe one time it's
well, they have to if it's healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If it's not going to stagnate.
Otherwise, you're just going to be pretending to be somebody.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think in certain ways, all of these spiritual truths are like literal truths. Like on some level, I think we are reborn. We reincarnate. Like literally, you know, are born into a new body at points during our times. But I also think even if you don't accept that, you can still look at it like through the lens of metaphor, in that you experience that even in this life. You are reborn over and over and over.
Yeah, I used to call it cremated and reincarnated, where I just burned down a life and end up in a different life. Now that's a much more painful process than it was when I was younger.
Why do you think that is? Other than
because I'm older. Because after a certain time, you're playing for keeps. You know what I mean? So you have less time to, you know, you don't want to be starting over at 40, although I've had to do it because of the pandemic. But that's why, you know, I think most people, like, they have one group and they work it. It's also tough professionally because, you know, most people pick one thing that they do and that's their whole career. Mm-hmm. And you look at any of these people, like, I think this is one of the ways you can tell a real magician. You look at somebody like Jen, or you look at somebody like Crowley, like, look at all the crazy shit that Crowley did. And he's like, I'm a painter, now I'm a world traveler, now I'm a poet, now I'm a
mountain climber.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, you could see that he was doing it really fast. Jen, I mean, God, you know, one of the things Jen said is you should never run out of people to be. And Jen was like somebody new every day, practically.
Yes.
And like, it was often very disorienting. So, like, it was often very disorienting. So, that's how you can tell. But it's like you get a much better experience of life. I think one thing Peter Carroll said once, this is, I think, a tongue-in-cheek statement, but he said, a magician is somebody that sells their soul for the opportunity of a wider experience of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because what he meant by that is if you don't believe that you actually have a core identity, then you can be as many people as you want.
It frees you up. Yes. The word, like what you were just describing, like for all these different people, like Jen or whoever it is, I always think, I agree 100%. That's one of the ways you can tell people that are really doing this work is because they become, to some extent or another, polymathic.
Yeah.
Like they're going to have their fingers in a bunch of different
I'm like that for sure. Yeah.
Well, I think part of what magic does is it forces all aspects of you to grow. Like intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, like all these different things. It's forcing you to grow in all these different ways. So you're going to end up exploring a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah.
If you look at Da Vinci, Athanasius Kircher, Crowley.
John Dee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's one of the telltale signs. Like you can tell when somebody's really doing this work because they're going to be doing a bunch of shit. And sometimes, in some ways, it doesn't even look like it's connected in any way. It looks like it's all over the map.
Yeah, I do all this shit. I don't even know why I'm doing it or why it's connected, but then it comes clear like several years later what I was up to.
Yes.
I think, it's like when you do like, I think it's often disorienting for people because it's like, again, there's like magic and then there's magic. There's magic that's your life and then there's magic that you do like where you're playing with toys on an altar. Mm-hmm. And they're both important because one is a model, a proper altar is a model of your universe and it's basic sympathetic magic. You change the model, changes the thing that it models. And, but, and I've thought about this over the years. It's like, one of the things you do when you're doing a Golden Dawn tradition, for instance, is you make your own magical tools, mm-hmm. right? And that is something that just repeats throughout my life. It's like, yeah, I made some magical tools with some cheap crap from Michael's and like acrylic paints and cardboard and all of that, paper, like colored paper, etc. But I have magical tools that I spent a year making, like every day, things like that. But then that's a metaphor for life. And I think you were asking at the beginning of this about why does magic produce ego inflation? And I think that one of the most important, what things are saying is never what they're saying. There's always the thing that is implied by something is always the most important message. And the thing that magic implies very existence, which is why I still use the word magic. So many people like Jen said, you should come up with a different word.
Yes.
And I tried, and it's like, like neuro-linguistic reality engineering sounds like crap, but like whatever. Like, mm-hmm. It's like, nothing's like magic. Just the word magic itself, when you say it, it breaks reality. It implies, it has a clown aspect to it. It automatically implies that this person is not necessarily sane or serious, which is good, right? Because, it's good. In my opinion, it's good. It feels a little dangerous or crazy, which is good because you should be on edge. But also it implies a break in reality. And the thing that I was going to say about the magical tools, it's like, yeah, you start off making magical tools, but then the next thing you know, it's like you're building your life. And magic implies that you have the power, not someone else, which is what causes ego inflation as a teaching tool. It also implies that you have to do things yourself. It's DIY spirituality. Mm-hmm. So like building a wand became for me building a business, building
a podcast,
writing a book, it's like, maybe, I don't know, maybe you've experienced this too, where it's like, for me, every time that I always get pushback on doing things myself, always. Like if I try to do something with somebody, like collaborate or work for someone else for a company, or like try to go like the traditional route of getting somebody to publish something. Sometimes it works, but usually, or even like hire someone to do something for me, I always get thrown back on doing it myself. Because the universe is like, no, you do it. And then when I learn how to do it, now it's easy.
Yes, I get that exact same thing. I'll come up with an idea sometimes, and I'll think this is like $1 million idea. This could be an amazing experience, whatever. And you introduce it to other people, and nobody wants it. Nobody wants to have anything to do with it. until you put the work in yourself and they start to see you successful at it. Then they're like, okay, now I want to.
Yeah, let me get a piece of that.
Yeah. After you've already done it.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's like just kind of the way things work, the way things work. But I also think that it's part of being a magician. It's like the reality is forcing you back. A magician, the magician card in the tarot is a guy at a table, like working on some tools, and that's kind of what it is, I think. So I'm always wondering, it's like, am I always kind of like doomed to have to do everything myself because that's just what the path of magic is? I don't know.
So far, it seems.
Yeah.
I haven't come across anything that's contradicted that so far. It's pretty true.
Funny, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how much you want to say in public, but you have some future plans about where you want to take things.
I do. Really, this is probably going to end up being one of the last podcasts I ever do. I'm going to do, I think 3 more after this, just because I had already said that I would do them. And it's like whenever I give my word, I try to the best of my ability to keep it. But I just feel like I'm, that incarnation thing again, like going into different lifetimes and like you were saying, doing so many things. I've done so many different things since I've been out. Like for a short while, I was a tattoo artist. Mm-hmm. And then for a short while, I was a visual artist and doing art shows. And then for a short while, not even a short while, it was like 2 years, I went around doing, like a speaking tour where I was speaking at like criminal justice classes and law schools and stuff like this. It's like I've lived all of these lives, but eventually in all of them, I kind of reached a point where I felt like, okay, I've done everything that I wanted to do in this area. And if I keep doing it, I'm just going to be repeating myself, or I'm going to be stagnating or something. It's like, I know it's time to move into a new world or to start becoming a different person. And that's kind of how I feel right now. Like I do not have, it's like they say, never name the well from which you will not drink. So I could come out and say, I'm never going to write another book on magic, and something would make me eat my words tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, I'm really wary of doing that because I've experienced that in my life, naming the well from which you will not drink, and then life forces you to drink from it in some way, or some unforeseen thing happens. But I really do not see myself writing any more books on magic. I feel like I may not have said everything that I know, but I said enough where if someone is really doing this work and they're really hungry, I feel like I simplified enough of it where they'll be able to pick up on it and keep going into the future.
Okay.
So I really just don't see myself. I'll probably always do like Patreon, like in a, like a quiet, private way like this, but I don't plan on doing any kind of public classes or retreats. My last retreat is going to be in October. And the reason I wanted to do this one last one is because I'm doing it with someone that I actually learned a great deal about magic, like not just like in a teaching sense, but just in my relationship with this person. It was like when we met in this bizarre way, but we never just hung out and chit-chatted or, done things that normal people do. Like it's a kind of a crazy story, but every single time we came together in any way, it was like I would leave that meeting with like a piece of something I needed to send me off in this whole new trajectory. And it's almost like anytime we come together and do something together, something amazing comes from it in some way, whether it's just internal growth or something. So it was like I wanted to do one last retreat with this guy, with this person, just because it was something we had always kind of talked about. I don't see myself doing retreats anymore. I'm not going to be talking about magic publicly anymore. And to be honest, I'm probably just not going to be talking, period. Not even just about magic, but like even about the case. In a lot of ways, you have to kind of keep doing interviews about that stuff just to keep the state's focus on it, But at the same time, it really does re-traumatize you. It's traumatic going back to it. And it's also, you're usually doing it with people that are not your friends, people that only want like some sort of sound bite. So it's almost like you're being probed. You know, it's like, imagine the most horrendous fucking thing that ever happened to you in your life. And then you've got people probing you because they want to get you to say something that's going to give them a 10-second sound bite for the evening news. It damages you. Like, it hurts you mentally and emotionally. And the way I feel about it now, it's like, I want this DNA testing done. I want my name cleared, but it should happen because it's the right thing to do. It should happen because anybody with any degree of integrity or morality would want to know who killed 3 kids. Not because I have to get up every day and talk about it to the local Arkansas news stations or whatever. So I feel like I'm done with that once and for all. I feel like I've done everything I can to set that in motion, and hopefully it'll come to fruition. But if I keep on doing it, I'm hurting myself doing it, going back to that stuff over and over. And I feel like with magic, like out in the world, I'm not looking for a new audience. And we were talking about the publishing industry and the magic industry and how so much of it is being a salesman. Like you have to sell people. I don't want to sell people things anymore. So I just feel like, honestly, it's time to start doing something else. And for me right now at this time in my life, this is bizarre, but for me, my whole life, 2 things have obsessed me. Magic. Like I discovered magic for the first time when I was like 7 years old. I didn't know what the hell it was. I came across like an old ad in the back of a tabloid that was like, want to learn magic, send $5.99 off of this, and we'll send you a book that'll tell you the secrets of the universe. For all I knew, it could have been like Harry Potter shit. But whenever I read that, it was like, if that's possible, why does anything else matter? That's what I was
the same way. Yeah.
Well, the other thing for me was martial arts. For whatever reason, when I was a kid, I thought it was like the most amazing. Like, if you could do the stuff you're doing, like the most, that's like the physical pinnacle of everything in this world. If you could, do like a spinning back kick or something, and you're like right next door to a superhero.
Yeah.
So magic and martial arts are always the things I was obsessed about. So right now, I'm kind of not putting as much energy into, like writing or, doing tours or whatever, talking about magic. It's all going into martial arts because I really do feel like what I want to do with my life now, that's what I want to focus on. Okay. And not just for myself, but also like introducing other people to it. Like at least assisting as a teacher to help teach people this. Just because it's strange. Like I say, those have been my only 2 obsessions. And I realize I'm rambling about this, but when I was learning how to do certain rituals in magic, like say the Rose Cross ritual, and you're trying to make sense of the diagrams of it, and you're trying to, like say the Rose Cross ritual, and you're trying to make sense of the diagrams of it, and you're trying to follow the directions, and it's like, okay, you start in this corner over here, and then you go to this corner, and it's like you're trying to figure it out, puzzle it out as you go along. And there would be things that I just couldn't get, like the Rose Cross ritual. Like I would be like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Like I can't visualize this. I can't picture this. And I would get obsessed with it. And it was all I could think about. And then suddenly something would click, like with the Rose Cross ritual, something clicked one day. And I was like, oh, that's it. I got it. I can see how it's supposed to be done. Whenever that happened, I jerked and woke myself up because I realized I was asleep. I'd gotten so obsessed with it, like focused on it so intently and exclusively that it even saturated my dreams. Like I was doing it in my sleep. The only other thing I've ever found in my life that was the case for was martial arts. Like I'll go to sleep now at night, and all night long I just dream that I'm kicking stuff. Really. But it's like that's the other thing, as goofy as it sounds, that I'm passionate. And the other thing also about it that I like is when you go into that place, when you go into a martial arts studio, there's no politics. Yeah. There's no religion. Yeah. In some ways, you were talking about like the remorse or the regret or the way you miss things like from the past or whatever. It's the only place I've ever found where it feels like it is a window into a simpler time in the past. When you go into that dojo, it feels like he lived in the 80s.
Mm.
That's what it feels like to me. It feels like he found a window back into the 80s.
That's what we all want.
Yes.
The window back to the 80s.
Yes. It's true. Yes.
I agree with you. I think that's one of the reasons, maybe that's one of the reasons why they've become so popular again. I think, other than the fact, it's like, yeah, that you were talking about ninjas the other day. It's like every kid in the 80s wanted to be a ninja.
Yes.
Like that was the
Did you have throwing stars?
Ones that I made myself out of cardboard.
I used to buy them from the flea market.
Oh, nice.
There were old people selling throwing stars in the flea market when I was a kid.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
They were like my prized possession.
That's great. They were actually sharp and everything.
No.
Okay.
You can maybe get them to stick in a dartboard,
Okay.
you know, if you threw it at that.
Yeah, throwing star was the ultimate. It's like, and ninjas know magic too.
Yes.
That's a big deal.
Yes.
Yeah, I think martial arts is, there really aren't that many places in our culture where people can even come together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, this is, I think, one of the loneliest times in human history, despite the fact that we're all connected. And it's why I love doing live streaming or podcasting, because it's like, it's kind of the one saving grace of the internet, where it's a way that people actually can come in. Because I don't think people had long conversations prior to this time, even in the 80s. Maybe in bars, you know,
Yeah.
it wasn't about deep stuff.
There's something magical about bars.
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds.
No, not at all.
Like some of the most influential conversations I've ever had in my life took place on a bar stool.
Okay.
It's weird. It's like something about the environment or the energy of a bar makes it conducive to exchanging information. And not even just about magic. I mean, think about things like, you know, one of the places I loved the most in New York was the Francis Tavern down there.
I know that.
It's down in the financial district. It was where George Washington used to meet with his troops whenever they were plotting the revolution.
Mm.
So it's been there, you know, since the dawn of this country. Like all these, you know, influential people used to meet there to exchange all these ideas. You know, that tavern, men sitting at this tavern in New York City is what led to the birth of the United States.
Wow. Was that a Masonic thing? Was that involved at all?
It probably was. That place, the Francis Tavern, is not really so Masonic, but I did this pilgrimage one time with one of the guys. I saw his name go through on here, Andrew Reyes. We went to Washington, D.C. and, you know, a few other places, New York, where we went to. I mean, people don't realize how heavily George Washington was into Masonic stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
a lot of presidents have been.
It was
generally the good ones
I
too.
had a vague idea, but it was kind of mind blowing even for me. Like we went to see, you know, like his ceremonial trowel. You know, like in magic, we have wands and pinnacles and stuff like this. The Masons, they have their trowel.
I've got a trowel.
Okay, they still had George Washington's trowel, and they said every time they like built some important building in Washington D.C. that was going to be connected to the government in some way, they still used George Washington's trowel when they're laying the foundation. I have another friend of mine that is a Mason was talking about George Washington's Bible, the Bible he swore in on.
Don't they have that at St. John's?
Yes,
Lodge
exactly.
in New
That's
York?
the lodge he's a member of.
So
So
that, I've heard really good things about that lodge. I was going to join that one, but then I left New York.
that's the one he's a
Yeah.
member of. But he was
That's
telling me like they loan that Bible out to places sometimes. Like for example, some other presidents have sworn in on it, or they'll put it on display in certain places. But whenever they do, they have to have some of the Masons from that lodge travel with it and even sleep in the same room with it.
Yeah.
And he said universally, everybody who sleeps in the room with that thing has all kinds of crazy dreams.
Wow.
Like about George Washington, some stuff that doesn't seem to be connected at all, but it really does. It's like that incubation thing where people used to go sleep in temples or what have you to try to be effective. He said that Bible does that to you. If you sleep in the room with it, like it definitely affects your dreams.
Masonry is a big deal. I think that it's, I mean, it's dying out, but that is, becoming a Mason for me was pretty mind-blowing, not because it's a magical order, because it's really not, but just you realize that there actually is, I mean, it is and it isn't. It is a magical system in a sense, but it's not like people are generally doing magic.
Right.
They're not doing magic in knowledge or anything like that, but it is a system. It's a spiritual system. And you see that America was the manifestation of the magical system that came out of the Enlightenment, that came out of Hermeticism.
Mhm.
This is a magical country, and there is this thing, Masonry, that still exists. It is like the esoteric backbone of the country.
Yeah.
And it's dying out because the Masons are dying, unfortunately, but literally. But that's another place that's like, you know, people used to belong to Masonic lodges, or like in the heyday of the OTO and the Golden Dawn and things like that. And, you know, Carol House put a book out about this. Prior to TV, it's like almost everyone in America was in some form of fraternal organization, even if it was like the Elks Lodge or something like that. And so places where people, whether it's bars or, you know, Starbucks really wanted to be a place like this, but it's kind of not.
Yeah.
But yeah, theoretically coffee shops, although I don't know, they're just valid in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
It's not the same vibe.
but martial arts, you know, also martial arts is like, you know, it's you can actually get physical contact with people, and that's shocking if you really think about it. Physical contact with other human beings, particularly after COVID, is shockingly rare, and it is that, and that is, it's got to be unimaginably bad for people.
I see so many other things that, like, you know, are just relatable or comparable, or however you want to say it, to magic. You know, like even the grade system of magic is mirrored in like the belt system of martial arts. Like I see so many like reflections and connections that it's crazy. And that's one of the things I think that makes me so obsessed about it or passionate about it, is I see that, you know, when we think of these things, we tend to think of them now as almost, it's just like self-defense or something like that. And yeah, it can be used for stuff like that. But like the core of it, what it's really about in its truest sense is self-transformation. Like it's like an alchemical process. Like when you move through a system of martial arts, you are going to be a different person from grade to grade. Just like in magic, you're going to be a different person if you're doing it correctly from grade to grade. So I see that there's tremendous opportunity for like self-improvement, making progress on the path of completion of the great work, all of those things. I see those things just as inherent in martial arts now as I always saw them in magic.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting when you really like look at the Eastern traditions too. I mean, a lot of martial arts go back to, like, basically all the Eastern traditions go back to India, and so does martial arts, the Bodhidharma and all of that. And it all kind of defaults back to some version of the chakra system. And they all seem to, if you look at martial arts or the Eastern magical systems, whether it's Tantra, Buddhist Tantra, Hindu Tantra, you know, all these things, they're all running on the same basic operating system. So they're all pretty interchangeable, which is super awesome.
Yeah. Yes. On that note, as much as I hate to, I should probably wrap up.
It's been a long time.
And we want to thank you guys. How many are you on here so far? 57. We didn't lose many people at all. We did not lose many people. Thank you guys for sticking with us through this whole thing. We were on here for almost 2.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, like 2.5 minutes.
It flew by. Yeah. Excellent. So I just want to say thank you guys for being with us today, for joining us. We hope y'all got something out of this. And make sure to check out Jason's podcast. It'll be out in about a week or so.
It's called Ultra Culture with Jason Louv.
There you go.
Wherever you get podcasts.
There you go. Ultra Culture with Jason Louv. Very good. All right, guys. Love y'all. And I'll talk to you in a couple of days or so. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me. Well, that was great.
It was indeed. That was a really, really